Right, the second learning theory that we are going to study today or discuss today is cognitivism. Now, the cognitivist, the person who adheres to cognitivism, views learning as involving the acquisition or reorganization of the cognitive structures through which humans process and store information. So, it is a very cognitive way of looking at learning or intellectual way of looking at learning. The cognitivist revolution replaced behaviorism in 1960s as the dominant paradigm. Cognitivism focuses on the inner mental activities, opening the black box of the human mind. It considers the human mind valuable and necessary for understanding how people learn. Mental processes such as thinking, memory knowing, and problem solving need to be explored. Knowledge can be seen as schema or symbolic mental constructions. Learning is defined as change in a learner's schemata. Now, as you would see, there were several key concepts that you need to understand cognitivism. This meta language such as schema, schemata. Now, what is schema? Schema is an internal knowledge structure. It is new information which is compared to existing cognitive structures, and they are called schema. Schema may be combined, extended or altered to accommodate new information. So, schema is our internal knowledge structure. There is a three-stage information processing model for cognitivism. The input first enters a sensory register, then it is processed in the short-term memory or STM, and then is transferred to long-term memory or LTM for storage and retrieval. Another phrase that we need to remember is the sensory register. The sensory register is or receives input from senses which lasts from less than 1 to 4 seconds and then disappears through decay or replacement. Now, much of the information never reaches STM, but all information is monitored at some level and acted upon if necessary. Now, STM or the short-term memory is sensory input that is important or interesting, and it is transferred from the sensory register to the STM. Now, memory can be retained here at STM for up to 20 seconds or a little bit more if rehearsed repeatedly. Short-term memory can hold up to 7 plus or minus 2 items. STM capacity can be increased if material is chunked into meaningful parts. Long-term memory and storage stores information from short-term memory for long-term use. Long-term memory has unlimited capacity. Some materials are forced into long-term memory by rote memorization and overlearning. Deeper levels of processing, such as generating linkages between old and new information, are much better for successful retention of material. So, from the sensory register, which remains there for a couple of seconds, for a few seconds, it goes to the short-term memory if it is interesting or memorable, or if it has been repeatedly rehearsed. Now, from the short-term memory, it goes to the long-term memory if links have been made from the short-term memory to knowledge that is already there. Or it can also be placed in the long-term memory by memorization or by overlearning. Now, there are several effects in cognitivism that we need to know. One is the meaningful effect. Now, what is meaningful effect? Meaningful effect is meaningful information which is easier to learn and remember. All right. The more meaningful information is to the learner, it is easier to learn and remember. Serial position effects. Certain items or certain things are easier to remember when they are in the beginning of the list or at the end of a list. In the middle of the list, it is much more difficult to remember them. Practice effects. Practicing or rehearsing improves retention, especially when it is distributed practice. By distributing practices, the learner associates the material with many different contexts rather than the one context afforded by mass practice. Alright, so in a classroom, the teacher might use one particular example and teach something, but the learner needs to individualize it and connect it to different aspects of his own knowledge. And when he associates the new material with different contexts or tries to remember it in different contexts, the learner is able to remember it better. Transfer effects. The effects of prior learning on learning new tasks or material. This is the transfer effect. Interference effects occurs when prior learning interferes with the learning of new material. Organization effects. When a learner categorizes input such as a grocery list, it is easier to remember. State-dependent effects. If learning takes place within a certain context, it will be easier to remember within that context rather than in a new context. Mnemonic effects. Mnemonic are strategies used by learners to organize relatively meaningless input into more meaningful images or semantic contexts. For example, the notes of a musical scale can be remembered by the rhyme, every good boy deserves fruit. E, G, B, D, F. Schema effects. If information does not fit a person's schema, it may be more difficult for them to remember, and what they remember or how they conceive of it may also be affected by their prior schema. So information that is completely new is more difficult to remember than information that can be fit into knowledge or prior knowledge that they have. Advanced organizations. Advanced organizers prepare the learner for the material they are about to learn. Organizing material, organizing information in a manner that is particular to the learner is easier for the learner to remember. This is not just outline of what we are going to learn, but the material is arranged in such a way that it is individualized to the learner, so the learner makes sense out of it.